It's being recorded, and the presentations and the recording will be available later today at Cando's website, edo.ca. Just go to the links to learning tab, and under Webinar Wednesday, you'll find all the materials. So today joining us will be Daniel Sandoz with OSME, the Office of Small and Medium Enterprise, and PSPC, Public Service Procurement Canada. After Daniel will be David Acco with Accosys, who will be presenting on the Indigenous Business Database and how a number of NIOs got together to develop a PPE co-op to meet the challenges of procurement for PPE as a result of COVID. So David will be presenting after Daniel. Daniel, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go.
Very good. Daniel Sandoz, everyone.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in Canada. I'm calling you from Victoria, British Columbia, and I want to acknowledge that I'm working and living and playing on the traditional territories of the Songhees Nation and the Esquimalt Nations. So now give me 1 second so I can go and get the presentation up and running. Can you all see my first slide?
Yes, we can, Daniel.
So like Paul mentioned, I'm working for the Office of Small and Medium Enterprise. We are part of the Department of Public Services and Procurement Canada. We are the ones who do most of the government procurement within the federal family. We're here to assist small and medium-sized businesses, or any business, anyone. You can be also a sole proprietorship, a micro business who want to do business with the Government of Canada. Come and see us, engage with us. We're here to assist you. So I will go now over to my preferred slide because we were spending time there. You will have access to the presentation so you can look at it in relation. buyandsell.gc.ca, that's the website that we will be using. That's the website you will be using to find lots of government information about procurement. All the procurement for goods over $25,000 and for services over $40,000 will be published on buyandsell.gc.ca. Yes, we will be migrating to a new platform, which is called Canada Buys, which is based on SAP Ariba, but right now it's still buyandsell.gc.ca. What do you find on buyandsell.gc? You will find all the procurement information. You will be able to set up feeds so you don't have to go on buy and sell every time. So you can put up an RSS feed or an email notification so you can see if a procurement of interest comes up, if there is some amendments to a procurement opportunity, you will be able to set up that as well. And you don't need to register. So you can browse for information without being registered on the site. You can, and it doesn't cost you anything. That's the most important thing. It doesn't cost, it's free of charge. It's free for you to use. There's so much information on that website. You will also be using, or you will go on buy and sell, and then you will be going to register yourself as a supplier. Why do you need to register as a supplier? You need to register as a supplier when you do business with the Government of Canada, and it goes over our department, the Public Services and Procurement Canada. Then you will need to register as a supplier in our database. So what do you need to register as a supplier? So you need the tax number, the 9 digit of your tax number that you have with CRA. If you don't have a tax number with CRA, on the website under the supplier registration, there's a phone number which will connect you to the CRA with the appropriate part of CRA to create a business number. The other part you will need to create a procurement business number is the legal name attached to that registration. Another thing for an indigenous business is also to register yourself with the Aboriginal Business Directory, which is with Indigenous Services Canada. Being there on that website, being in that directory, you're visible to government procurement, you're visible to private entities who want to do business and want to partner with an indigenous company. You will be also visible to other levels of government who are looking for indigenous companies to collaborate with. And for certain procurements, you will need to be registered on that database as well. So it's very important that during the times you want to do business with us, to connect with us, find out who is buying what. For that, one basis is the buy and sell website. The other thing is also get in touch with us at the Office of Small and Medium Enterprise. We are here to support you, to help you, and help you becoming successful at the government procurement. And we also thank all the support we get from David and from Cando and others in that regard.
Thanks, Daniel. Michael had a question.
Yeah.
He asks, this registration number, is it to sell services, goods to the GOC, Government of Canada, or also to receive grants and funding from the Government of Canada?
So this is specifically tied to all the businesses that all the business that happens over our department. So all the big tenders that go over our department, so for buying, that's why you need to register for it. That has nothing to do with other grants and contribution programs that the Government of Canada has. This is just so that the government will be able to pay you for the contract, for the work you have done.
Very good. Thank you, Daniel. David, are you going to share your screen and start your presentation?
First, I'll unmute myself. Again, before I jump into it, I'm just going to let everybody know, full disclosure, I'm an Indigenous business, so this is the lens I look through through things. So this presentation, I'm just going to give you sort of the view of the tricks of the trade kind of things that we've learned after being in business since 2006 and working with government. So it's been a pretty good journey. So feel free to chime in, give me or ping a question or two, and I'll try to answer it as best as I can. So I'm looking at it from your lens. So hopefully I'll be able to share impart some knowledge here. So let me just share my screen here. Share. Okay, I assume everybody can see it. We're good?
Looks good.
Okay, fantabulous.
Way better than last time already, David.
Oh, let's not talk about the past. So just going to give you like the overview of the Indigenous procurement opportunities. What's it like being an Indigenous business? Finding opportunities. Daniel has shown you one view, and that is our go-to view. And also preparing bids, what you got to think about, when you're preparing a bid. So that's one thing I'd like to be able to share with you. I'm going to move the screen because I got this huge one. Here we go. And also thinking about certification, because one of the things about being an Indigenous business, you got to be certified, that kind of thing. And certification has a lot of benefits to, being able to be identified as an Indigenous business. I'm going to take you through a little demo of the co-op. And I'm going to give a little discussion about the concierge service. Daniel had talked a little bit about it. We're working hand in glove with OSME and with Cando. I'm actually working for Cando on the concierge, but for the organizations there, it is also food for thought on how you can support your suppliers as well. So without further ado, I will jump right into it. So why being an Indigenous business? When I first started 2006, I kind of looked at it and said, why would I want to identify myself? Why would I want to wear my colors on my sleeve? So just I'm a member of the Peter Ballantyne band in Saskatchewan, more of the PA side of it. Typical, they say urban Indigenous guy, kind of live in Montreal and grew up here, but still very connected to the community and my relatives and all in Saskatchewan. But I decided that I want to be an Indigenous business because one is I want to be able to promote my, Indigenous businesses, wear my colors on my sleeve, but there's a whole business case behind this as well. So it's like, for example, $38 billion has been contributed to Canadian economy by Indigenous businesses. 8 out of 10 Canadians believe that Indigenous businesses should participate in the economy, and supporting Indigenous businesses, is a pathway to reconciliation. So this is what the government had learned. Everybody remembers the Oka crisis and the RCAP report, and the truth. They realize that they have to do business with Indigenous companies as part of the reconciliation journey. So 71% believe such training and mentoring for Indigenous business is important. Hence, we are here. More importantly, there is an Indigenous business in every province and territory, and we're the fastest growing sector of the economy. So a lot of good reasons that we should be here. But like I would mention that a majority of Indigenous businesses are SMEs, right? So they're between single entities versus very large companies, 250, 500 people, maybe, and sometimes they're even larger, where depending on where they are, where they're located. So a good example is the Clearwater, New Brunswick, bought by Member2. That's going to be a large company, and it's Indigenous owned. So hats off to us. So there you go. Just give you a perspective, okay, on Suncor. Suncor, they had a snapshot. I was very lucky to get this, and saying why, obviously Suncor with the treaty negotiations and access to territory and so on and so forth, they felt being part of the Indigenous economy or promoting the Indigenous economy and bringing suppliers in is very good for business, and it's proven itself out, right? So over 800 million in revenue for Indigenous businesses, exceeded their targets for 2025. They actually surpassed it when they first rolled it out, and they're using SAP Ariba. So hats off to the government for choosing that. 15% new increases in business, surpassed 10 new Petro-Canada sites. 2 of them are wholesale. So just to give you a good perspective of the opportunity in the private sector as well, within government. So the Psab Initiative, this is the one I zeroed in on as being a key part of my business development. So this has been supported since 1996. It was a product of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the RCAP report. And what government needed to do is they realized they have to do business with Indigenous businesses. And we were mainly left on the fringes. But Psab has really changed the fabric of Indigenous business, and also the visibility, which I'll go a little bit further into down the slide. So Psab is a procurement strategy for Aboriginal business. It's supported by ISK. And they were, when I talk about the database for the PPE, they were key partners in government, both PSPC and also Indigenous Services Canada. So when you look at federal procurement, there's a few things you got to zero in on, right? You got mandatory set aside. So this is set aside for Indigenous businesses. It's written in policy, and they have another group called voluntary set aside. So what a department can do is that if they identify Indigenous businesses and there's capacity to respond, they can just set aside and put a contract and say, okay, well, there's Indigenous businesses that can support this. So they put a voluntary set aside. And this is very important, these 2 aspects. This is where you have to visit the buyer. One is to build up your visibility, because they can put it as a mandatory set aside, especially if it's in an area of interest. Let's say if there's a project going on in Winnipeg, it's on reserve, it's a mandatory set aside, a voluntary set aside. Like if there's a capacity within Ottawa or within Montreal or our areas, whatever city, they can put it on a voluntary set aside. The other way to do business is, especially when there's a set aside program where you don't have the capacity per se, or don't meet the requirements, you can actually do a JV with a non-Indigenous partner. And the way that's set up under the procurement strategy or the Psab strategy, it has to be 51% owned and operated. And the shareholder agreement has to show that. How profits are split up is a different formula, so they don't tell us how to run their business, but they want to know who has a controlling interest of the joint venture. It has to be an Indigenous company. But you have to show your card, you have to show all the proof of identity and willing to be audited, which I'll go a little bit further into. Incidentals is a really interesting, and this is what they refer to as a business that, it's been a set aside, not even a set aside, but it's gone through the regular stream, but an Indigenous business has won the business. We've fallen into that category where we bid it on the mainstream contracts and we won. So, and sometimes there's 30 or 40 bidders that we just gave the best value to government for money, and that would fall in the incidental. Indigenous participation components are, basically, this is an interesting thing because what it is, you can have a large $500 million a year program that can only go to certain primes, but the government can turn around and say, for this particular project, it has to have an Indigenous participation component. And it could be in terms of capacity building, it could be in terms of supplier development and, and certain amount of spend. There was one particular project we're working on right now for the First Nations Inuit Health Branch. It's a technology project. 25% of the spend has to go to Indigenous businesses. And we're talking about a $300-400 million a year program. So we're falling into that IPC. The company had to bring us into. They have conditional set asides. What is possible, conditional set asides could be used. Okay, this is open to Indigenous and non-Indigenous suppliers. But if 2 or more Indigenous businesses submit a bid, then it could be a set aside, so that kind of thing. And this is really interesting because PSPC is now notifying us of the opportunities. So if more Indigenous businesses are applying to running for the bid, then this would be very worthwhile, where they can make it to a conditional set aside. And of course, the one that's important is the modern treaties, the comprehensive land claim agreements. And what is interesting is they fall into what they call an ITB, or an industry technical benefit, where they can have within their what they call an IPB, which is an Indigenous benefits plan, where the prime has to. And usually you see them with where there's a defense contract or a very large procurement. So I talked a little bit about this, and this is where the comprehensive land claim, but it's also doesn't have to be, but this is where to stimulate the Indigenous economy, they have an Indigenous benefits plan. And this is where, like, for example, there's huge procurements going on right now. The national defense over the next 10 years is going to spend over $500 billion in new acquisitions. So by that, every prime, so let's pretend, like, for example, for the future fighter program, I'll take a look at the future aircrew training. This is where Canada has been one of the biggest places for people around world air forces to come and train in Canada. We've been doing this since World War II, which is nothing new. But what's new is now it has an impact, an Indigenous benefits plan. And there they have direct and indirect. So direct could be like maintenance and repair for the aircraft or equipment. Indirect could be like hotels and transportation for pilots. It could be accommodations. It could be rooms for training. So that's sort of the indirect. So these have an Indigenous benefits plan that's associated with, and they're using this to target what government has is this 5%. You hear a lot about 5%, and that the government wants to spend on, on their total spend with Indigenous businesses. So big business case along those ends. So when you look at government procurement, look at it directly, okay, and then look at it indirectly, because primes now have to have a component along those lines. Corporate diversity spend. This is another interesting one that I wanted to zero in. So just to give you a perspective of journey, when we first started business in 2006, we didn't have the qualifications as a business to zero in on building, having client references. So we went into corporate social responsibility side of it. And by that, we started getting contracts and so on and so forth. But what we tied to the primes that had to have an Indigenous business. So, we spent for a couple of years using diversity spend as a way of getting the qualifications to do government directly. So that's a bit of the journey story. Finding opportunities, we're talking about buy and sell, which I won't go into, but the provincial procurements and corporate procurements, I'll zero in on. As we mentioned, buy and sell, that is our go-to website for looking for opportunities. Highly recommend, as Daniel put out there and showed you, that this is the first stop. For us, I wanted to zero in, there's other links that are available here on buy and sell. And these are ones that if I would get the business, your business development manager, start looking at and start loading themselves on the tender sites. Just to give you perspective, the conversion rate that we look for when we're doing bids is for every 10 bids we're putting in, we're hoping to get a conversion rate of 30%, which is 3-4 out of every bid we're winning. This year has been really good. I'm not going to lie to you. We have a conversion rate of 80%. So we're doing something right. So, and I think it's a combination of climate and also because we just happen to have the right skills at the right time in this particular economy. So again, but where we are, we're always pinging these sites. Finding provincial opportunities. This is one thing. Look in your own province. If you're in Manitoba, Ontario, Ontario has a Indigenous business policy. Manitoba, not so much. Saskatchewan, definitely. BC, definitely they have. So some provinces are not as equal. However, like if you're in Quebec, Quebec is looking for ways to do business with Indigenous companies. And this is one of the first things that they're starting to look at in terms of maybe looking at what the government's done on set-aside programs or IPBs or whatever situation might be. So just to give you a perspective, SAS Power, Crown Corporation, they won contracts with 66 businesses, 259 million, 593 purchase orders. They work with the tribal council. If there's economic development offices out there, then they have that and as part of the fabric. So the way I kind of look at EDOs or economic development, they're crown corporations within the community. So work closer with your EDO and as a supplier, but EDOs work closely with procurement and government. So that's where, and Cando, big plug for Cando. They're set up for that. They're there to help and actually, lack of a better word, lobby for Indigenous economy and Indigenous businesses. So just a few words about government and versus corporate. So government sector, the procurement's run by the state, so they have a separate department. Everything about government is transparency, and they have to be transparent to the public. Awarding, who they awarded, what, you have, if you wanted to know why you lost, you can call up and ask for a debrief. You won't get the prices of the next person, but what you'll do, you'll learn about what your price, what your score was. And I usually go a lot of debriefs because I want to learn, for the next bid. Because you got to remember, I want a conversion rate of at least 30%. So public service practices, they have processes, now this is the downside about government business, is they have a long sales cycle. Some of them can go on for years, some of them can go on for months, some of them can go on for 6 weeks. So, when you put in a bid, get ready for the long haul. And of course, everything's within the public interest. Right now, reconciliation is in the public interest. So there's a lot of push along those ways, hence the 5%, hence the Indigenous benefit plans and IPCs. So the timing is right, is to do business with government. Downside, with corporate Canada. So usually it's with an individual, so you have to find that particular person that manages the corporations. Transparency, it depends, okay, that kind of thing. So they don't have to be as transparent because a lot of the companies might be privately owned, or they have certain, competitive, they have certain policies and so on and so forth to protect their vendors on their supply chain. Private procurements are generally more centralized, which is a good thing. They also, what you need to target yourself, especially with banks or the financial, or whether you're in energy companies, you have to be part of what they call a master supplier arrangement or a vendor of record. So you have to go through the same process where they have a call, and then they basically sort of bring you, you have to qualify for that, and then that's your license to hunt, and that's what the departments use to contract with you. And there's a lot of segmentation inside the supply chain. So if you're a minority supplier, women-owned business, Indigenous business, so and so. So yeah, that segmentation is important. And of course, values place the money, time, and risk. That is where the challenge lies when you're doing business with government. So with private industries, joint ventures can really play into here to limit the risk and build value to money. I'm looking for JVs all the time and partners. Certification, a couple of words of certification. By being with an organization, I took one here, tourism, because it focuses on Indigenous businesses. Cando focuses on Indigenous businesses. Being part of those associations are important because they bonify you. The other portion of it is for procurement strategy for Aboriginal business, registering, getting onto their directory. That's certification for the government. The departments won't ask if you're an Indigenous business. They'll ask Indigenous Services Canada, to validate, and they'll do an audit. CAMC certified, this is one that's sort of been recognized. It's been around for a while. And of course, the CCAB, which is a certified Aboriginal, they call it CAB. So just to give you a perspective, I'm a Psab member, so I'm on the directory. I'm a CAMC certified member. I'm also part of CCAB, and also I'm part of Cando as well. So, because I want to be as visible as possible as an Indigenous business, and certification does that for you. So without further ado, I'm going to just jump right into the medical supplier database, and I will stop sharing. A new share, actually. Oh, that's great. So hopefully you can see this, and I'll share that. Okay, so I'll start from the very top. Okay, so this is what we call a commodities base. We built this in partnership with Psab, ISK, and we also built in partnership with PSPC, and we developed a lot of the processes around it that we've been sharing with all the other national Indigenous organizations. So this really started off as a response to call to government and to bring Indigenous suppliers to provide PPE and COVID-related services. So a number of companies signed on. There's about 450 small companies making hand sewing masks, another one's manufacturing masks, other ones that have tipped into their supply chain and some of the connections that they have and pivoted their companies, and other companies that are providing transportation services, and they pivoted their company to provide medical transportation services. So simple thing. It's so I'm a government buyer. I want to look for masks. I click on masks and I search. So it's plain and simple as that. So I hate live demos. So there you go. And it'll show you that there's 75 results, 75 different companies. So we have 450 companies, and it's still growing, that come in. And basically, if I'm a government, I say, oh, geez, there's someone in Vancouver. I can zero in on Vancouver, find out who this person is. I can visit. This is animal marketing. They actually won, I think, a mass supply arrangement. I think it was shy under $1 million or something on a big call. So I can visit their profile, find out a little bit more about them, who they are, what are they offering. And this is what they're offering: disposable masks, N95. And with this company pivoted, they had a good supply chain in China and around the world, and they were able to get supplies in large quantities. and they're a verified business. You know, in this case, CCAB, I can contact the director. So if I go back to another supplier here, I'm just going to just quickly reload. This supplier is another supplier. This one is Aboriginal Paint, and they're Cando certified. And and I'll get a little bit into the concierge. I can ask as a government buyer, I can ask for some help, and they can call me up. And what I can do on the part of the concierge is help them get introduced, find out capacity, support. And my job, you know, is to make sure, but to support a transaction. So, and I'll go a little bit further back, a little bit into that. But there's a real person behind here that can help a buyer, and it could be a provincial buyer, it could be a corporate buyer from corporate Canada, it could, you know, it could be the federal government. That's as simple as the database gets. It's very straightforward, it's very easy to use, and it shows the location of the different suppliers, you know, that are available in different areas. So a lot of government buys regionally, so identifying where you are is key part of this process as well. Let me share, and you might go back to my presentation here, and I will continue. Okay, so the medical supplier database, I just showed it to you. So generally speaking, you can, you know, add yourself to the profile. There is a way to log on the website itself. You just got to click on it. It'll open up a form. You can fill it in, and you know, we'll start the process. There's opportunities for Indigenous suppliers, because once you're registered on there, we have a mailing system where we actually, working with PSPC, we actually mail opportunities to you, and also can get answers. So this is where you can actually click and, you know, get some support on a bid. And also, and it could be support directly from government. You know, as Daniel pointed out, we work hand in glove, you know, and it could also be support on, you know, can I ask this question? I got a lot of those questions. Can I ask for an extension? And I said, absolutely. You know, so this is what how you should ask the question. So there's that side. 3 easy steps. You know, basically you complete the form that's just logging on. We review the application, and then we publish your profile. Now, here's the thing, okay? What we do is, working hand in glove with ISK, is that we will, if you're not on the membership, on the Psab supplier, we would support you to get onto the membership, you know, the Indigenous Business Directory for Psab. Because once you go through that process, then we put your profile on the database. Now you can do business with government, but now you're visible to corporate Canada and visible to the provinces as well. So just a little bit about Rick. I said 51% owned, proof of Indigenous heritage. So status card, you know, Métis card, beneficiary. So there's a number of things that are accepted as documents. You have to have that. I have my status card that I show and make it part of my application, and I get audited. They ask for my status card. And that's, you got a third part. You got to be open to auditing, you know, that kind of, before government releases a contract, especially if it's a large contract, they might ask you to say, hey, you have can you show me your incorporation papers? Can you show me your, you know, your status, proof of indigeneity? So concierge, I talked a little bit about understanding. So what we do, we help, and concierge is basically a real person helping facilitate a transaction. So, so this is the thing about the concierge, is that it really works hand in glove with government, because government can have a certain kind of conversation internally, and it can only take it to a certain point. We can have different conversations where government can't. So normally we can support or give some advice around preparing a bid and so on and so forth, or we direct you to where a government can answer a question. Like, for example, OSME, how to do business with government, you know, and or maybe the contract off with something specific about that, the contract. So other considerations, one of the things that we're looking at is we want to increase there's a technical word, it comes with velocity, which means I want to get as many transactions, because there's spend that's under 25K. So those are the ones that do not have to go to tender, so they can be directed. In case of some other ones for services, it can be up to 40K. So those are part of the rules. You should get yourself acquainted to that. And to give you a perspective, the credit card transactions is under 10K. And correct me, Daniel, if I'm wrong, so feel free to chime in and correct me. Under 10K. And if anything under 10K is a credit card transaction. So for PPE, for even in the future, if you're doing marketing supplies or renting a room or whatever, government can do that, can buy off that. So using the credit card. Now, here's the interesting thing about it. There's about 10,000 cards out there, and I have a $10,000 limit. So if you do the math, that's a chunk of change, getting into that network. So we're looking at EDO considerations, employment targets, capacity building, Indigenous supplier inclusion. These are very hot buttons for Cando, very hot buttons for, and also for work. When you come on the database, there's a membership directory. So you got to remember, you got to be a member as many places as possible for the amount of visibility. So if you're not a member, you should be a member. So just let this person in. I talked about the concierge and how it works. Services, I mentioned bid support, buyer support. Oh yeah, this is very interesting, and this is where I go back and I'm trying to work more and more with the suppliers. We need to have metrics, okay, and you need to give feedback, and you can do feedback through through Cando, through the concierge service, or with the new system, we're trying to build more metrics in there for government to be able to understand a little bit more about the selling behavior, about the suppliers, where they're located, so that when they do their planning for their next round of opportunities, they can identify capacity within a certain area. And I'll give you a perspective. Like, for example, there's one big, large project going on right now in the National Capital Region called the Precinct Project Renewal. And this is what their House of Commons and so on and so forth. They need stone carvers. They need all sorts of different Indigenous suppliers. And in there, they have a benefits plan. So the primes have to have come out and identify as many Indigenous suppliers to add on to the supply chain. Now, this project is a national project, so they're going to do it in Ottawa, they're going to do it in Saskatchewan, they're going to do it in wherever there's a government building. So, so to be regionally known is very important. But they need the metrics, they need the reporting in order for them to build up their programs. So this is what we're zeroing in on, and that's it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I will open the floor to some questions or comments.
Thank you so much, David. Anyone with any questions or comments, please. Now's your chance. And we have David and Daniel, who represent a tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience. So it's time to turn it over to you.
And I'm very liberal. I share everything, man. So
sometimes to a fault, David, but that's not
yeah. Maybe that came out wrong.
So again, this session is being recorded. It will be available later today, along with the presentation files. And I had posted the specific location, but just go to the Cando website, edo.ca, go to the links and learning menu tab, and then look for Webinar Wednesday.
Yeah. So I got a question here. What type of stone carving were you just discussing? So, for example, a lot of these things go through some amount of renovations. So they might be some restoration work or something towards that effect that deal with, that famous gargoyle that's sitting on this corner of the Parliament building, or there might be some newer opportunities along that way. So let's pretend this is a really good example of a transferable skill. So you have someone who's a stone carver, and they do a lot of Indigenous art and so on and so forth. It's not a big stretch to turn around and pivot to do something sort of restoration work and getting those kind of contracts. Or if you're into masonry or something towards that effect, Because if there's stone carvings, the chances are there's a lot of masonry work going on. So I would be, as an Indigenous business, trying to probe around, talking to the supply chain, calling up PSPC and saying, who are the primes? I want to know who they are. Give me a name. And it's what they do. That's the function of government to promote as much business as possible. And the way I look at these opportunities, I want to make it as easy as possible for government to spend money. So being identified and finding a way to qualify is taking away a lot of the risk, the no's, and all the rest of this kind of stuff. Daniel, you want to add to that?
Was there one thing I want, a piece of advice? When you see something you're interested in, engage early so that you have time, because sometimes there's some time restrictions. They will tell you, or if you see a government tender, they will tell you between then and then you can raise questions. And don't be shy. If something is unclear in the tender document, raise the question. In all the tender documents, they will publish the process on how to do it, if you need to engage with them by email. And the only person who is allowed to talk to you about an open tender is the contracting officer, which is named on the cover page, on the buy and sell website. So get in touch with that person early. As soon as you can, you see something you're interested in and you have a question, contact that person, or raise your question as soon as you can.
Yeah. And just to build on what Daniel just said, there is what they call industry days, and industry days is a way to kind of get, because the government's announcing, hey, we're thinking about this big program. It's a big national program, or we're zeroing in on like a regional program. By going to the industry days, there's two functions. One is you get information, which is the primary thing about what's coming up, and you can start planning it a little bit. The other portion of it is networking. So I'll give you, for example, when we went to that First Nations Inuit Health Branch, they putting out their new system and they're doing a modernization. So literally I was the only Indigenous company there, and they didn't talk a lot about Indigenous space. So I went up to the mic and I asked one fundamental question. Is there going to be an IPB part of this, an Indigenous benefits plan or something, or an IPC? And I said, I'm an Indigenous business and this is what I do, ... that kind of thing. And the government said, no, there will be. We got a 25% spend, and we're looking, if there's capacity, we'll do a certain amount of things. And it's very important that you get it identified. And I was like, why am I the only guy here, But with the interesting thing about it after the fact was all the business cards started hitting me. All the primes started coming into me and saying, well, we want to have a conversation with you. We want to know what you're doing. And those industry days are gifts, because then it can kind of give you a projection of what's to come. And then you can get a little bit picky, because you could be like, the IT company, that you want to, and you're helping them formulate what their Indigenous benefits plan is. And also the other side of the coin is, if there's no capacity, you can also get into their supply chain, and they can do, I call like shotgun weddings, where, you have their Indigenous non-Indigenous supplier turn around and say, if you want to really do business with us, it would really be helpful is if you partner with this particular company, and then a private industry can do that to improve their Indigenous benefits plan or their Indigenous participation component. And that's where the JVs come in. That's where it can become really strategic. The other one is RFIs. Respond to the RFIs, give information, get out there and be visible. That's what they're designed to. And it's really government coming out and saying, who's out there, what's your capacity? We're looking for this. So, and you know what, to respond to an RFI, believe me, it takes 15 minutes. I am Accosys, this is what I do, and it's like just answering the basic questions, so, and then they'll send you the RFP, believe it or not, and that's when the real rubber hits the road.
There was a question about where do we find info on industry days, when and where?
Daniel?
The Office of Small and Medium Enterprise, we get contacted by the procurement branches when they intend to go out and talk about large procurements. we help them or support them, help them putting up those days in the different regions around Canada. And we then engage with associations, with David, with Cando, and other Indigenous associations and industry associations to spread the word about industry days.
Mhm. Yeah. So that's that. And like I said, just a little word about industry days and so on and so forth. They are on buy. I think they're on buy and sell. They're available. The information's there. And one of the best things about membership is I would be haranguing Cando to say, hey man, keep your finger on the pulse on industry days and let them know as part of the newsletters and so on and so forth. And it's tough. It's an Indigenous business. If you're like a sole owner and so on and so forth, or you got a small team, to leverage these particular contact points and building this network saves a lot of energy. And going to the conferences is another way I find out a lot of information. So I work nationally. I got projects in Edmonton. I got projects in Toronto and Ottawa, Montreal. So I'm kind of the basically pan-Canadian. I usually go to the conferences and network because that's where I get a lot of information from. And it's the best way for me to cover the country, to go to the membership meetings. So that's another way of doing that, because you'll get information. Someone asked, when you mentioned the need for Indigenous proof, the Indigenous owner status Métis card is needed. Does this mean the eligibility 51% greater? What proof of documentation? Michael Barreau asked this question. So sorry, I'm trying to understand your question very quickly.
Sure. Do you want me to just explain it? Here,
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can do that. Hi, thanks so much for all the information as well. I really loved it, and I'm really happy to connect with you later if I can. I was just wondering, because you had mentioned that you need kind of, if you're getting audited or stuff like that, you would need your status card or Métis card to prove that you're Indigenous. I'm just wondering, because the eligibility, as you said, to be on there is that you need at least 51% or more of Indigenous owned of that business, like if you're doing a joint venture. Do those like owners need to have that status card, all 51% kind of thing, to be eligible to be on the website?
No, absolutely not. The non-Indigenous partner has a 49% control. So you have the controlling interest of the joint venture. You're making the decisions, right? We bid, we don't bid, you know? So it could be as simple as that. If they turn around and say, wow, you know, and it's really kind of funny because I just went through this yesterday with the company. We looked at the margins with our key joint venture partner. And, you know, we said, listen, there's nothing in for us. We don't want to bid. And he can't bid under that JV, period. Yeah. You know, so that's the way, but that's important. That's important. That's important to have, you know, to make sure that this is an Indigenous business, which is Indigenous controlled. Now, let's pretend we did bid and we did win, you know, that kind of thing. When the auditors come along, they're going to ask for that card, but I'm the good guy that's going to have to produce that card. My partners don't have to at that particular point in time. You know, so where it comes a little bit, you know, where it comes to usually a joint venture is a 50-50 relationship. Depending on the gorilla you're in a room with, the profit sharing might be different, you know, that kind of thing. And depending what you are. So there's somewhere I've given a little bit of profit away or so on and so forth because I need the qualifications. I need their qualifications. So it's a very symbiotic relationship, you know, that kind of thing. And I have a joint venture with PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big 4 auditing management firms and so on and so forth, you know, it's really interesting to say no, you know, so a big firm like that, but that's the value of you know, being an Indigenous business and what you're bringing to the table, you know, that kind of thing, because at the end of the day, they want access to market. This is a market they would not have without your relationship. So that kind of thing. So, and you need something from them. So there's a bit of give and take along those lines. You know, but the corporation and the status card are the key 2 elements. That answer your question, Michael?
But Michael, just to be clear, use the 51% has to prove that it is Indigenous owned with the evidence requested. Mm-hmm. So by status card, a standing in the Métis community and so on. You can't just vouch for it. You have to then prove it. That's what the audit is for.
Yeah, no, this is for government, okay?
Yes.
Remember, I told you
yes.
corporations are a little bit different. What
Yeah,
they
yeah,
rely on is they rely on the relationship with Cando. They say, okay, Cando's vetted him. I'm assuming Cando is, you know, in order for them to be part of their membership, they have to show their indigeneity, you know, so,
Yeah.
so that process. So from a Cando standpoint, the Royal Bank will say, "Mom, good enough for me. If they're a Cando member, they're good enough," you know, that kind of thing. So, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
Okay. And can I just confirm then, because if it's a larger economic development group kind of in that way, is it specifically then the owners that have to have that, or is it the board members, or is it the person putting out the contracting bid? Like it's 51% owned, but
It's ownership. Yeah, it's ownership. Yeah, the board members could be different, you know, that kind of thing, but it's a controlling interest. So, you know, at the very end of the day, when they look at the shareholders agreement, this is what's going to make the determination. So that's what you show your incorporation papers.
Yeah. Okay.
You know?
That answers my question perfectly. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Dan.
You're welcome.
Very good.
Oh, wait a second. This one comes from Darcy. Can you subcontract an IT service through another company? Darcy, do you want to jump on the line here and we can have a little chat? Because I want to make sure I really understand. Can you subcontract an IT service through your company? The short answer is yes. You know, there's a number of contractors that we do work with. They're another company because they have the right skills at the very end of the day. So depending on what the project is, like for example, if it needs a security clearance, you might have to sponsor that subcontractor, you know, for that, because it's like any other business, right? You have employees and you have subcontractors, you know, their subcontractors have another business, or you can have, in some cases, you know, where I'm working on a project right now where I'm actually working with a company that really specializes in that, but they're subcontractors and they're just going to give me an invoice, you know, for that particular piece of work, you know, so, yeah, so that sort of, kind of explains the subcontracting relationship. But at the end of the day, you own that contract. It's on your paper, you know. Now, which means if there's a security requirement, then you might have to sponsor that other company. So they have security requirements, and I highly encourage you to kind of get it done early, because a lot of government contracts usually need enhanced reliability. So there's a step that you have to go through in order to have that. And I can spend hours on security requirements. So, but you can ping me after and I can kind of explain it. Or Paul, if you want me to do another webinar, please, on security. I'm sure we can do something.
Man, you're ever the entrepreneur and the salesman, right? Always looking for the next
Always
the
hustling
next
for
gig.
nickels, friend. Always hustling for nickels.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely. I think that's something we should pursue, David. Actually, that's a very good topic for a webinar.
Susan says, Susan Cook says, so here David's answering questions. Okay, any other great questions that I can fill you in with? Or I know we got 5 more minutes left, so. I can ask, okay, let me pose a question to everybody else. How many entrepreneurs are here? just raise your hand. Or EDOs. Oh, okay, I saw one hand go up. Because I really
Susan is an EDO.
Susan, okay, Susan. So I always looked at Crown corporations, so EDOs as Crown Corporation. What is the biggest challenge that EDOs are facing right now? I'm really curious about that. Let me pose that question to you and promoting your business. You can put it in the chat. My friend has a cybersecurity company and is Indigenous and builds teams worldwide. Oh, that's a good one. Okay. So Susan, while you're thinking about that, what's the biggest challenge? I'm going to answer this question. That is an excellent question. And the reason you can, theoretically, you can't use, with some government contracting, you cannot use offshore. If there's a security requirement along those lines, offshoring is not an option, you know, because you can't sponsor a company offshore, that to be within Canada. And sometimes with, especially with other resources, I have this biggest challenge when I'm dealing with this awesome new immigrant programmer, Java, with, I mean, this guy is a whiz and everything else like that. He just landed in Canada maybe 6 months ago. I tried to get him a security requirement. They got to be in Canada for at least 3 to 6 years, depending on the security requirement. So that's one of the challenges with dealing with offshore. Now, corporate Canada, again, it's different, right? They play with a different rules. You can maybe have an offshore relationship where some testing is done or some cybersecurity is done, that can be, parts of it can be part of an IT company, and you can do some offshoring and be more cost effective at the very end of the day. But again, it's about security requirements, it's about operational testing. Those are one of the challenges you have to mitigate and work with, because that one slide I showed to you, best value for money, qualifications, and risk. You have to really look at that continuum when you're dealing with companies that are offshore. So security is going to be a big issue with government. Risk management is going to be a big issue with government, and with corporate Canada as well, along with best value for money, of course.
Perry had a question about number of Indigenous employees. So to be considered an Indigenous business, it's 100% to do with ownership, right? Not number of employees. Ownership and control, or what?
It does, actually. So 33% of your employees have to be Indigenous, above 6. So that kind of thing. That's not counting contractors, unless something has changed. Daniel, feel free to chime in and correct me. Okay, but so it's above 6. So at least 2 of your employees or need to be Indigenous. Some companies, the way they work on is their core staff is their the accountant, if they have administration staff, and so on and so forth, then they really put that in the Indigenous front, or even the marketing person could be Indigenous, and all the rest is kind of good stuff. But the rest of the contractors, they have a contracting force, and what they do in that particular case is that that's what they use for project delivery. Now, I got some news that's coming down the front here. Psab is going through a bit of a reboot. In other words, since the Royal Commission in 1996, it has not changed. So it's been a whole generation. And what they're realizing is that the requirement for Indigenous and to be employees, they're probably going to lift that. And the reason why it's because it's too restrictive for Indigenous companies, especially because you don't find a lot of Indigenous cybersecurity Java experts out there, so you got to zero in on everybody else. But what government's going to zero in on, I think, is the Indigenous participation component. Like, I'm going to give you this money, and I really want to give because I love you, that kind of thing. But how are you going to, bring in up capacity or make those, socioeconomic metrics that I'm trying to build? How are you going to build in reconciliation? How are you going to supply, build up a supply chain? And it might be part of that particular bid in order for government to get their socioeconomic benefit out of the government spend. So this is one of the ways I think they're going to be looking at it in the future. So and the way also I look at it is it's incumbent of an Indigenous business to support Indigenous people, so as an owner. So I'll give you a perspective on how I manage that as an IT, as a management consulting practice. I do a mixture of contractors, but what I did was, and I have Indigenous employees in my core staff, and what I also did was I started an Indigenous internship program, provide in my domain. So I take profit from my consulting practice, and there's 60 something odd of us running around, and I also do some matching dollars where I can with ISETs, or I fund them myself. So they become full-time employees. They count towards my Indigenous headcount. So I encourage my customers to hire them at the very end of the day. So I've had like 50 success stories that I can point out to, total capacity building in, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And this is a way, and I always put that in my bids that I'm doing this. This is my core mandate, it's a centerpiece of my business. That's the way of being creative and giving, not, I wouldn't say giving back, but you know, if you're going to wear it on your sleeves as an Indigenous business, you have the obligation to support the Indigenous community, you know, in some sort of capacity. So I just leave that thought.
We've got to move.
Oh, sorry.
on,
Okay.
David.
Okay. Sorry, you got me talking. Okay.
We have another, Daniel and I have another session coming up in 2 minutes ago. So I want to thank David, Daniel, and especially guests who took time out of their busy days to join us. We are going to present another procurement session a week from today on the 31st. Similar topics, similar folks. You may want to revisit it again if you're a glutton for punishment, as I am. Or like was suggested today, I think we'll kind of refine some of our presentations into the details of applications, including security clearances and those kinds of things. So thank you again. Recordings on the website later today, presentations as well. Thank you, David. Thank you, Daniel. Always good to hear from you and have you share your tremendous knowledge with us. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Cheers. Thank you.